It began with a single spark from a fireworks fountain. A small oversight. But in just 4 minutes, that small mistake transformed Al-Haytham Hall, a place supposed to be the happiest night of 2 young lives, into a living hell. When the smoke cleared, 107 lives were lost, leaving a permanent scar on the Qaraqosh district of Iraq. How could a modern venue, accommodating over 1,000 guests for a night of revelry, become a deadly trap in seconds? The answer lies deep within ignored regulations and deadly decisions born of human error. And to find it, we must go back in time to the moment before the first alarm sounded. To understand the sheer magnitude of this catastrophe, you first have to understand the geography and the history of the ground we are standing on. We are in Qaraqosh, also known as Al-Hamdaniya, situated on the Nineveh plains of northern Iraq, about 15 kilometers southeast of Mosul. This ISN and Apos, just any town. It is a place that has seen the very worst of humanity. A predominantly Christian enclave, the locals here carry the trauma of recent history in their DNA. For years, they lived under the brutal occupation of ISIS. Families were displaced, homes were destroyed, and the fabric of their society was torn apart. By September 2023, the town was finally finding its feet again. The sound of gunfire had been replaced by the sound of construction. There was a sense of renewed hope, a fragile peace that the community was guarding jealously. Al-Haytham Hall stood as a symbol of this return to normalcy. Located on the outskirts of the town, from the outside, it looked like a palace. White columns, grand entrances, LED lighting. It was designed to host the massive, lavish weddings that are typical of the region. It was the place to be seen. It was where you went to celebrate life after years of fearing death. But appearances, as any building inspector in Australia will tell you, can be deceiving. Let's introduce you to the people inside. Tuesday, the 26th of September, 2023. It was meant to be the start of a new chapter for Haneen and Revan. Haneen, the bride, looked stunning in a traditional white gown, intricate and heavy with lace. Revan, the groom, stood tall beside her in a sharp suit. They were young, they were in love, and they were surrounded by their entire community. This wasn't an Apos, a small, intimate gathering. In this part of the world, a wedding is a town hall event. Inside the main hall on the ground floor, the atmosphere was electric. Over 1,000 guests were packed in. Men in suits, women in vibrant evening dresses, children running between the tables playing tag. Picture a man we'll call Yosef, a pseudonym. He's a father of 2, a laborer who worked hard to help rebuild the town after the war. He's here tonight to relax, to drink with his mates, to watch his kids dance. He is sitting near the back, watching the couple with a smile. He represents the backbone of this community, resilient, hopeful, and unsuspecting. It's a scene familiar to anyone, whether you're in a reception centre in Western Sydney, a community hall in Melbourne, or here in Qaraqosh. It was a night of pure joy. But this sense of security was a mirage. The guests didn't know it, but they were dancing inside a tinderbox. The hall had been renovated recently. The owners, looking to modernize the look, had clad the ceiling and walls in Ecobond and sandwich panels. To the naked eye, they looked clean and modern. But essentially, they were sitting inside a box lined with solidified petrol. The ventilation was poor. The air conditioning was recycling the same stale air. And crucial to the disaster that was about to unfold, the layout of the tables was dense. There were no clear aisles. It was a sea of people and furniture. As the clock ticked towards 10:45 p.m., the she and Apos, LLB right attitude that often plagues safety culture was in full swing. The owners believed the process was safe. The guests believed the venue was compliant. They believed that because nothing had gone wrong yesterday, nothing would go wrong today. It was the profound, deceptive silence before the storm. Let's zoom in to the center of the dance floor. It is 10:45 p.m. exactly. The lights dim. A hush falls over the crowd, replaced by the swelling sound of romantic music. It is time for the slow dance. Haneen and Revan move to the center of the floor. They are the center of the universe for these few minutes. Around them, 4 machines are positioned. These are cold fountains and indoor pyrotechnic devices. They are marketed as safe for indoor use, supposedly emitting sparks that are cool to the touch. But cool is a relative term. They still generate heat. They still rely on chemical combustion. As the music hits a crescendo, the fountains erupt. Columns of silver sparks shoot 4 meters into the air. Visually, it is spectacular. The guests cheer. Phones are out, recording the moment for social media. But look closely at the footage. The ceiling in this hall wasn't soaring high like a cathedral. It was low. And dangling from that low ceiling were massive, intricate chandeliers festooned with plastic flowers and fabric decorations. The sparks didn't and appos just fade into the air. They shot upwards, licking the plastic decorations hanging from the chandelier directly above the couple. At first, it looked like part of the show. A few guests looked up, pointing. There was a smell, not of gunpowder, but of melting plastic and harsh chemicals. Acrid. Sulfurous. In Australia, we are trained to react to the smell of smoke. But in a crowded wedding hall, sensory overload is the norm. The music, the perfume, the food, it masks the danger. The denial phase of a disaster is a terrifying thing. Human psychology dictates that we normalize the abnormal. Surely, they wouldn't and appos light fireworks if the ceiling was flammable? Surely, this is part of the effect? But physics does not care about denial. The plastic decorations ignited. They didn't and appos just burn, they dripped. Burning droplets of plastic began to fall onto the dance floor, dangerously close to Haneen's voluminous, flammable wedding dress. Then, the fire jumped. It moved from the hanging decoration to the ceiling panels themselves. This is where the chemical composition of the building turned lethal. The ceiling wasn't and appos plaster or concrete. It was highly flammable metal composite cladding. Once the flame touched the exposed core of those panels, the reaction was instantaneous. A ring of fire began to form directly above the bride and groom. It was a halo of death. The music faltered. The DJ stopped. And then, the ceiling panels didn't just catch fire, they disintegrated. At that precise moment, the main power grid to the hall failed. The lights went out. The only illumination came from the hellish orange glow spreading across the roof like a living creature. The first desperate calls for help, their version of 000, began to be made. But for the 1,000 souls trapped in the dark, the clock had already run out. What happened next defies belief. It wasn't and appos a slow spread. It was a flashover. Witnesses described the ceiling collapsing within seconds. It wasn't and appos just fire. It was a rain of molten plastic. Imagine standing under a shower, but instead of water, it is liquid napalm. The fire didn't and appos climbed the walls, it fell from the sky. This terrified the crowd. The natural instinct in a fire is to get low, to crawl. But the danger was coming from above. People were being burned on their heads and shoulders while they stood. Panic, raw, primal, and uncontrollable, took over. 1,000 people surged. And they all surged in one direction, the main entrance. This created a deadly bottleneck. Let's look at the architecture of failure. A hall of this capacity, under Australian building codes, would require multiple, clearly marked, unlocked emergency exits with panic bars. Al-Haytham Hall had side doors. But reports and survivor testimonies indicate a horrifying reality. They were either non-existent, hidden behind decorations, or locked to prevent gate crashes. The service doors in the kitchen were small and obstructed. The crowd became a fluid mass. The pressure at the front of the main exit would have been crushing. People were not just dying from the fire, they were being crushed to death by their neighbors. Inside the hall, the temperature skyrocketed. We are talking about radiant heat intense enough to melt skin instantly. The highly flammable sandwich panels released toxic gases as they burned. This wasn't an appos just smoke. It was a cocktail of cyanide and carbon monoxide. Many victims didn't and appos burn. They suffocated before they even hit the floor. The Ecobond panels, banned in many jurisdictions for high-risk buildings, acted as solid petrol. 00:60 seconds. The ceiling is fully engulfed. 2:00 minutes. Parts of the roof structure begin to fail and collapse inwards. 3:00 minutes. The hall is a blast furnace. Outside, the scene was one of utter chaos. The local Furies and civil defense teams were scrambling. But Qaraqosh ISN and appos Melbourne. The infrastructure was stretched. The narrow roads leading to the venue were clogged with wedding guests and appos cars, preventing the fire trucks from getting close. Civil defense teams struggled to connect hoses. By the time water hit the building, the roof had already caved in. The blackout added to the horror. In the pitch black, Illuminated only by the falling debris, families were separated. Mothers lost grip of their children's hands in the crush. Revan and Haneen, the couple at the center of the tragedy, were swept up in the madness. They were physically dragged towards the kitchen exit. Haneen, encumbered by her heavy dress, stumbled. Revan pulled her. They were trampled, burned, and traumatized, but they breached the exit. They spilled out into the cool night air, gasping. But behind them, the screams were being silenced, one by one. The noise was a cacophony of terror, the roar of the fire which sounded like a jet engine, the shattering of glass, the screaming of trapped families, and the distant, impotent wail of sirens that arrived too late. For 4 minutes, Al-Haytham Hall was not a venue. It was a crematorium. Yet, even in the depths of hell, the spirit of humanity, what we in Australia call and quote, mateship and quote, emerged in the most harrowing way. Survivors didn't end appos. Just run. Many turned back. One young man, Martin, a pseudonym based on survivor accounts, recounted running back into the smoke 3 times. He wasn't an appos, a firefighter. He was a guest. He wrapped his suit jacket around his head and plunged into the darkness. He pulled strangers from the crush. He dragged a woman out by her arms until the heat became so intense it singed the hair off his body. He collapsed on the lawn, vomiting from smoke inhalation, only to try and get up again. Outside, the scene was a tableau of grief. Survivors were wandering the car park, dazed, covered in soot and burns. They were checking the faces of the dead, looking for their children, their spouses. Revan and Haneen, though physically alive, were emotionally shattered. As they sat in the back of an ambulance, the realization hit them. Haneen had lost her mother and her brother. Revan had lost 15 members of his family. The wedding was meant to unite 2 families. Instead, it had decimated them. The most haunting sound that night wasn't an appos, the sirens. It was the mobile phones. In the silence of the aftermath, as the Furies dampened down the smoldering ruins, hundreds of phones rang out from beneath the rubble. A chilling chorus of ringtones. Mothers, fathers, and friends calling loved ones who would never pick up again. The screens lit up in the darkness, displaying names like and quote, mum and quote, my love and quote, home dot and quote. It was a digital graveyard. Hospitals in Qaraqosh, Mosul, and Erbil were overwhelmed. They were not equipped for a mass casualty event of this scale. Burn victims lay in corridors. Supplies of oxygen and bandages ran out. The medical staff worked for 48 hours straight, making impossible decisions about who could be saved and who was too far gone. When the sun rose over the Nineveh plains the next morning, Al-Haytham Hall was nothing but a charred skeleton of twisted steel beams and ash. The White Palace was black. The Iraqi government, sensing the volcanic anger of the public, launched an immediate investigation. This was their equivalent of a royal commission. The Prime Minister visited the site. Warrants were issued. The investigation didn't and appos take long to find the smoking gun. In fact, the evidence was hanging from the roof. Forensic experts and arson investigators descended on the site. They didn't and appos need a microscope. They needed a pair of eyes. The primary cause. The hall was clad in highly flammable metal composite panels. These panels contain a polyethylene core. When ignited, polyethylene releases heat at a rate comparable to petrol. These types of panels have been the subject of intense scrutiny globally, similar to the cladding issues we've seen discussed in building codes right here in Australia after the Qaraqosh fire in Melbourne or Grenfell in the UK. Using them indoors, on a ceiling, in a venue using fireworks, was criminal negligence. The safety failures. Furthermore, the venue lacked basic safety systems. Where were the sprinkler systems? Absent. The fire extinguishers were inspected. Many were found to be insufficient, expired, or empty. The emergency lighting system failed instantly when the main power cut, leaving guests blind. The accountability. The owners of the hall had cut every conceivable corner to maximize profit. They had expanded the hall, removed walls to fit more people, and used cheap, dangerous materials to make it look expensive. The investigation revealed that the building was effectively operating illegally, without proper safety permits. Corruption and bribery were whispered about in every tea house in the city. How did a building like this exist under the nose of the local council? The authorities moved quickly. The venue owners and several staff members responsible for the fireworks were arrested. The Ministry of Interior announced the results of the probe just days later, and quote, gross negligence and quote. But for the families weeping in the streets of Qaraqosh, handcuffs were a cold comfort. The legal system could punish the living, but it could not return the dead. The Qaraqosh Wedding Fire wasn't an Appos, act of God. It was a man-made disaster, constructed panel by cheap panel. It was a tragedy born of greed, incompetence, and a casual disregard for human life. In the wake of the tragedy, the Iraqi government announced strict new inspections of public venues. Hotels, malls, and reception centers were closed down for failing safety checks. But regulation written on paper means nothing without enforcement on the ground. For us watching from the safety of our living rooms in Australia, this is a grim reminder. We often complain about, red tape. We complain about the strictness of building inspectors, the cost of compliance, the annoyance of fire drills. But look at Al-Haytham Hall. Those regulations, those annoying rules, are the only thing standing between a peaceful night out and a suffocating death. Safety regulations are written in blood. The tragedy left a demographic hole in Qaraqosh. An entire generation of young people, parents, and grandparents was wiped out. Haneen and Revan survived the flames, but they are dead inside. They eventually left the country, unable to live amongst the ghosts of their wedding day. Their anniversary will forever be a day of mourning. Tonight, as we mourn with the people of Qaraqosh, let us remember the 107 souls who went to a party and never came home. They remind us that safety is not a luxury. It is a right. And when we compromise it for profit, the cost is paid in human lives.